was a lofty chamber, lined and littered with countless bottles, test tubes and little Bunsen lamps with their blue, flickering flames. There was only one student in the room, who was bending over a distant table, absorbed in his work. Dr. Watson, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Hello everybody, I'm KC and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About, and welcome to the first installment of Sherlock and the Curious Critic. So what better place to start than with the reimagined mystery that took the world by storm, A Study in Pink. It's pretty weird coming back to this for the purpose of a review after seeing how big Sherlock got, because it's easy to forget that, at the time, this was uncharted territory and quite a risk in adaptation. Sherlock Holmes may be one of the most adapted fictional characters out there, but this is the first time he'd been updated for the 21st century. I mean, the 22nd century, sure, but never the 21st. But since this is the start of the series, let's take a second to go back and see how we got here.
I don't want to go.
In 2010, the year Sherlock premiered, Stephen Moffat became the new showrunner for Doctor Who, following the departure of lead actor David Tennant and showrunner Russell T Davies. And Doctor Who played a big part in Sherlock's conception. Before he became the showrunner, Moffat wrote several episodes for the modern series and took several train rides during those times with fellow Doctor Who writer and friend Mark Gatiss, both of whom are massive Sherlock Holmes fans. So naturally, conversations about the great detective were frequent, including the question of why Sherlock Holmes had never been brought into the modern day, at least not since the Basil Rathbone movies. And every now and then, when creative types ask the question of, why hasn't someone made this, it's possible that it will evolve into, hey, why don't we make this? And then they did. Well, okay, there were a few more moving parts, but that's how it started. And with the success of the Guy Ritchie movie the previous year, which might merit its own video another time, people were open to the more unusual interpretations of this British icon. So how strongly did Sherlock come out of the gate? Stronger than most. The basic premise is that a serial killer is running around London creating serial suicides, forcing the police to go to a certain consulting detective, with his new roommate getting thrown into the chaos and a world of mystery in the process. I think the best way I can express what this show does best as an adaptation is explain how it ultimately sold me on its concept. You see, I heard about this show really early on, before it came to the US and just after it aired in the UK. So that means I get the bragging rights of, I liked Sherlock before it was cool. But because of that, I was skeptical, to say the least. This is coming from someone who liked the Guy Ritchie movie, FYI. I was afraid that dropping Sherlock Holmes into our modern age would make it like almost every other crime drama out there, without transferring what I love so much about the stories and characters. But Sherlock managed to eliminate all of my concerns with this scene, where Sherlock and John meet for the first time. See, A Study in Pink is loosely based on the very first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet. When I read the original book, I assumed it would just drop us into Baker Street and get to the action. But A Study in Scarlet is an origin story, an introduction to this now iconic pair, showing how they met, how they became roommates, and how they developed into this crime-fighting team we know and love. Right from the start, the same concept is carried over into A Study in Pink, and this is the only adaptation I'm aware of that depicts Sherlock and John's first meeting and under the same circumstances. With John having recently returned from Afghanistan, which is kind of odd that that's possible both in the 1880s and in 2010, and running into an old friend who says he knows someone looking to share a flat with. I was already impressed that the story had been followed so closely in such a new setting, but once Sherlock asked John if he returned from Afghanistan and recites multiple deductions he's made about John's life in just a few seconds, my skepticism melted away and I was in for the ride. It's familiar and delightful if you're a fan of the books, but unique and inventive enough to make a journey with characters who have been adapted literally hundreds of times feel fresh. And another thing that shows that is the cast. Sherlock mostly focuses on adapting existing characters, but throws in quite a few original recurring characters, every single one of which stands out and gives memorable performances. I could say quite a bit about all of them, and I'm sure I will over the coming months, but for now, let's focus on the iconic partners in crime, starting with the star of the show. I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw Benedict Cumberbatch on screen, my reaction was, what? Sherlock Holmes is one of those characters with a look that is chiseled into your brain from the first time you see it. And while this episode was doing a great job at displaying his presence before the reveal, getting across his personality and relationship with Scotland Yard before we ever see him, when Cumberbatch didn't immediately display the features I was used to, I was a bit nervous. But once again, when he meets John, and especially once he rattles off his deductions about him, the picture became complete. And by the time he said his name was Sherlock Holmes, I didn't need the confirmation. I believed it. Cumberbatch won me over instantly. It's a visual departure from what we're used to be sure, but most of the actors are. One of the reasons the casting across the board is magnificent is that they are able to bring these characters to life without relying on surface level recognition. And performance-wise, he is one of the best to embody the character. The way he moves around and even sits during a scene, the laser focus in the middle of a case, being able to deliver copious amounts of dialogue without missing a beat, it works on every level. Reportedly, Benedict Cumberbatch was the first and only person considered for the role, and seeing it in action, I absolutely understand why. It's a truly remarkable performance, and it's easy to see how his career skyrocketed after just the first season. But you can have a great Holmes, most adaptations do, but it's nothing without a strong Watson by his side, which has been a bit more difficult over the years, to say the least. Thankfully, they struck gold again with one of the most continuously difficult parts to portray accurately with Martin Freeman. As Lindsay Ellis said in her series on the Hobbit trilogy, Martin Freeman has spent most of his career playing the put-upon everyman, mostly because he's amazing at it. More recent adaptations have definitely ran more with the angle of how exasperating it can be to have Sherlock Holmes as your roommate and friend, and while the conversation of how that's presented in this series is probably best saved for the next episode, you definitely get that vibe from Freeman, how he's both fascinated by this man and his intellect, and constantly annoyed at his pushiness and self-indulgence. John is the audience surrogate, the gateway for us into this world and routine that the rest of the characters around him have inhabited for years now, and the discovery of this new life he'll throw himself into, from what Sherlock really is, to who he works with, to who his enemies are, we'll get to that, is paced and laid out incredibly well. It's definitely the episode that's told the most from John's point of view, and given that the original stories were told that way, that makes sense. Speaking of the original stories, one of my favorite things about Sherlock as a whole, and is very prevalent in A Study in Pink, is how elements from the original stories are sprinkled in major and minor ways to give the adaptation a more familiar life. And since I'm such a nerd, I'll tell you all about them in as cohesive a way as possible in this new segment. To clarify, this segment will be going through as many references as possible to the original books. There are other parts of Holmes' history referenced throughout the series, but I'll point those out on their own when they come. Now then, as stated before, Sherlock and John's first meeting is a callback to their first meeting in A Study in Scarlet. The deductions Sherlock makes from John's phone are very similar to what he deduces from his friend's watch in The Sign of Four. The location of the murder victim that Sherlock takes John to investigate is the same as in A Study in Scarlet. In a clever reversal, the clue about Rachel being mistaken for the German word Rache is also from A Study in Scarlet, where Rache was mistaken for Rachel. Baker Street itself is not only a great update of the classic location, but the best feature to me was the jackknife on the mantelpiece pinning down Sherlock's correspondence as described in the Musgrave Ritual. Sherlock's text to John about coming if convenient or inconvenient is word for word from The Creeping Man. Sherlock using nicotine patches to think for a 3-patch problem is a rewrite of the line a 3-pipe problem from the Red-Headed League, which is such a good line it's become a phrase on its own. Sherlock's more recreational habits are referenced subtly to be a thing, but a thing of the past at this point in time. The phrase commonly associated with Holmes, "the game is afoot," is reworked to "the game is on," which I gotta say, I'm not a fan of. One of the victims of the serial killer is named after a victim from The Problem of Thor Bridge, who also died going back for his umbrella, and the ultimate villain is very similar to the one from A Study in Scarlet, but we'll come back to that. One of my favorite things the show does is reference continuity errors and has fun with them. In the original stories, Watson was shot like he was here, but depending on the story, he was shot in either the leg or the shoulder. So in A Study in Pink, they give John a psychosomatic limp in his leg, and it's revealed at the end of the episode that he was actually shot in the the shoulder. Now that's a fun workaround. There are of course other smaller allusions. A study in pink while reworking the source material to tell a new story is probably the most similar to the case it's inspired by, so just following the main story gives you a sense of deja vu if you read the novel. So let's get back to it. One of the things that makes the characters so appealing and the mystery so engaging is the dialogue, which is witty and amusing with more than enough quotable moments. A good example of how engaging the dialogue is how they integrate Sherlock's deductions. Some are elaborate and some are casual. Some are clever and insightful, and some are downright hilarious.
Your deodorant told me about.
My deodorant?
It's for men.
Well, of course it's for men. I'm wearing it.
So Sergeant Donovan.
With the back and forth of putting the case together, or people just trying to work in the same environment, it takes advantage of every moment of screen time and is enhanced by the polished delivery from the actors. That polish might also be helped by the fact that technically, this is take 2 on A Study in Pink. It's a pretty well-known fact that Sherlock was originally conceived as a 60-minute series, and a pilot was shot in that format. It even comes on the season 1 DVD set, but the powers that be liked it so much that they asked to expand the series into 90 minutes, which for A Study in Pink at least, was for the best. The pilot is fine, but not only does having another go at it help iron out some of the kinks that pilot episodes so often have, and this one certainly did, but the longer runtime lets them add in more atmospheric moments and more meat to the story, not to mention the time to give the show a strong visual direction. The directing is distinct and unique, creating a visual language for the show that really helps it stand out, especially during the deduction moments, using editing techniques to follow Sherlock's train of thought in a very creative way. While I attribute this style of directing to Paul McGinnon, it was so well received that it would become a staple of the series even when other directors stepped in. Also, the text messages floating on screen instead of pointing a camera at the phone is brilliant and so much better, and I'm really surprised more productions don't do it. A good scene that highlights the directing style in A Study in Pink is probably the chase scene, with Sherlock and John chasing a cab that they believe the killer is in, showing off more of the energetic editing in the show without getting confusing. It's a great sequence, even if it turns out to be an American red herring. But despite the appearance of being a false alarm, that chase was the final major piece in the mystery that would culminate in the big reveal.
It was you, not your passenger.
I know the killer was a cab driver in the book too, but this also seems to me like one of those Moffat twists that makes everyday occurrences absolutely terrifying. I would bet money that a good chunk of Sherlock viewers hesitated at cabs for a little while after seeing this. Yes, the serial killer was a very intellectual cabbie by the name of Jeff Hope, though his name is never given in the episode itself. And right off the bat, Phil Davis gives an absolutely chilling performance, being just the right combination of someone who's unassuming, but threatening in an understated way once you see beyond what's on the surface. His confrontation with Sherlock is unbelievably tense. It's just the two of them talking, but the stakes with each side trying to just outthink and get under the skin of the other leaves you on the edge of your seat as the pieces to why Jeff Hope did all this come to light, and being filled with suspense and dread as the life or death test is placed right in front of Sherlock. Now, the test of choosing a good pill or a bad pill was in the novel as well, but as Stephen Moffat has said countless times, one of the biggest missed opportunities of this method to him was that Sherlock Holmes is never given the test. And doing that in A Study in Pink not only adds to the incredibly tense atmosphere of the final conflict and increases the stakes, but brings to light one of Sherlock's greatest shortcomings in the series. Jeff picks Sherlock up right outside of Baker Street with a good chunk of Scotland Yard there. He could have had him arrested right then and there, and he almost does. But Jeff tempts Sherlock to go with him as it's the only way he'll find out how Jeff killed his victims, and Sherlock can't stand not knowing. Before this point, while he was annoying to an extent and lacked some social tact, Sherlock wasn't really seen as anything but logical. Most of the officers in Scotland Yard resent him because he is right all the time. He can see things and put pieces of a crime scene together in a way they just can't. To the point that, as ridiculous as it sounds, they sometimes claim he's the killer. either. Really, he's just the most clever and observant person in the room, and always is. So when something comes along that challenges that, he has to be better than it. Once he hears how Jeff killed all those people, there's nothing keeping Sherlock there but his own ego. He basically has a confession, but the information isn't enough. Sherlock is lured into Jeff's game by the fact that he has to be the most clever, that he can't be outsmarted by someone like a serial killer, and just the thrill of successfully solving a mystery even when it puts his own life on the line. It's something he'll have to work to put into perspective throughout the course of the series, and thankfully, that's where John comes in, who saves Sherlock's life at the last minute before he can take the pill he chose. While the show is called Sherlock, A Study in Pink is very much John's story. As said before, he's the surrogate for the audience and the fresh face in Sherlock's world. So by the end of the case, we need to have a good idea of why John would want to be thrown into the life of crime and investigation that comes with renting with Sherlock Holmes. And we definitely get that. John is shown to be in a similar place his Victorian counterpart was when he met Sherlock. A soldier with no direction, lost and not quite sure where to go or what to do with himself. So of course he's going to be intrigued by Sherlock and what he is. This is definitely present in the original story, but explored much more in A Study in Pink. How quickly he's ready to jump at the chance to join Sherlock on his, at the time, unknown business, and how he's not willing to be shaken by other people's warnings about Sherlock or bribe into spying and giving information on him. John is, for lack of a better word, fascinated by Sherlock, and the challenges that are presented here help make John whole again, like how he completely forgets his cane during the chase, and how when everyone else dismisses Sherlock disappearing as him just running off again, even if he's known him less than a day, John has seen enough of Sherlock's methods to think that he could be in trouble, and is the only one to go after him. And don't think Sherlock doesn't notice. In fact, this partnership seems to be mutually beneficial. From the interactions we see from people who know Sherlock throughout the episode, he's not used to people being anything but annoyed at his skills, so it's easy to see why he doesn't mind how much John is impressed by his deductions.
It's fantastic. Do you know you do that out loud?
Sorry, I'll shut up.
No, it's fine.
He even starts looking to him for evaluation on his social cues. Can I please reiterate that these two haven't even known each other for 24 hours? But something just clicks. Because ultimately, John makes up for Sherlock's shortcomings, and even in just this first case together, Sherlock is better off because of that. Especially in this case, because without him, he'd be dead. And I do like how in the end, we never find out if Sherlock picked the right pill, because it doesn't really matter. While all of the elements of the show come together to create something amazing, the progressing friendship of Sherlock and John and the chemistry of Cumberbatch and Freeman is what truly makes the show work. Maybe that's why most adaptations don't present A Study in Scarlet as the origin story it is. They just want to get to the iconic duo who have known each other for years that is so ingrained with the image of Holmes and Watson. Which is fair, but I really like seeing the transition from two strangers to partners in crime solving over the course of one night. It's a great journey to watch unfold, and especially to revisit after seeing the rest of the journeys these two would have together. But there's one more thing to cover. During the episode, there's been a figure in the shadows, trailing the boys and even confronting John for information, described by Sherlock as his arch enemy. And before this adventure wraps up, he confronts Sherlock, who finally utters a name that is synonymous with Sherlock Holmes' intellectual equal.
It wasn't me that upset her, Mycroft.
Wait, what?
This is my brother, Mycroft.
I'm not gonna lie, the reveal that this guy was just Sherlock's mysterious but well-meaning older brother may be the best twist in the show's history, or at the very least the one that caught me the most by surprise. I think John's bewilderment at Sherlock and Mycroft's petty bickering matched mine pretty accurately. I mean, I'm not the only one who thought he was Moriarty, right? Having an unusual amount of influence over his environment, especially with surveillance, taking John to an abandoned, secluded parking garage to ask him for discreet information on Sherlock. Again, Sherlock calling him his arch enemy. So the reveal that this was all just sibling conflicts is just priceless. It adds up in the most messed up way possible and will pretty much be the blueprint for their relationship during the series, so look forward to that. And I have to give props to Mark Gatiss for playing this unreadable yet elegant version of Mycroft superbly. No idea why he carries an umbrella though, maybe it's a movie reference I'm missing. But don't worry dear viewers, there is still the name drop we all were hoping for.
The name!
planting the seeds for the threat on the horizon and the boys from Baker Street who are ready to face it. So, overall, how do I sum up A Study in Pink?
It's brilliant, 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 I tell you.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I want to emphasize again just how much I didn't expect this to work. I've been a fan of the novels and stories for about a year by the time Sherlock came along, and when I heard about it through a random YouTube comment, it sounded so weird. But at the time, I had been searching and searching for an adaptation that recaptured the intrigue and development that I read through in A Study in Scarlet, and I got that in the most unexpected way possible. A Study in Pink is regarded as one of the best debut episodes for a show in the past decade, if not of all time, and I am very much inclined to agree. The cast couldn't be better, the visual language is creative, the respect towards the source material is remarkable and appreciated, the updates are clever and even enhance points about the original novel, such as getting rid of Jefferson Hope's ridiculously long backstory, like thank God. And like any good start to a series, it leaves you wanting more, paving the way for the vast adventure of mystery and intrigue and domestic squabbling to come. I couldn't wait. And now that the introductions are out of the way, next time we'll talk about a more conventional mystery, relatively speaking, in The Blind Banker. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.